Hello guys, and welcome to part 2 of my HTPC build. I'm going to try to keep this as kind of neat as possible in terms of shortness. I don't want it to drag out too long. So basically I'll show you what I've done so far. Taken the lid off the case obviously, and the first thing I normally like to do is fit the power supply. The reason why I like to fit the power supply is because, you know, normally there's only one place for it, so you may as well put it in. Gives you an idea of the kind of space you've got to work in, and it gives you an idea of like the amount of, you know, kind of cabling that's going to be necessary, how tight it's going to be. One thing to notice is normally there's going to be a space for the power supply to take in cool air from the outside, and then it will expel it from the back, from its grills at the back. So the orientation of the power supply is something to bear in mind. If I'd switched it around the other way with the fan inside, it wouldn't have necessarily been the best thing, because this way it's going to be able to take in cool air from the outside, and you can see it's got a nice this case got a nice mesh on it, so it keeps the dust out. So it's going to take in the cool air from the outside and expel it from the back, and that way it kind of, you know, it does its own kind of cooling, as it were. So get that in properly. Let's get those in. There we go. So that's step 1. Power supply is in. Let's move on to step 2. Now that the power supply is fitted, move the case out of the way, because now we're going to install the CPU into the motherboard. Now, this was my most nerve-wracking part to do when I first started doing custom builds, but it really is easy. Now, that's all the bits that come with it. You've got to remember the I/O shield. There's been many a time where people have built a custom PC and forgot to install the I/O shield into their case, and have then had to take apart their case just to fit that in. So you make sure that you plug that, you know, you clip that into the back of the case where it's meant to go. So let's just get this out. You'll find most motherboards come in some kind of an anti-static bag. This is no different. See, it's a nice and compact motherboard. I purposely chose it because the smaller the board, hopefully the more space I'll have to work in. Let's make sure that's in view. So I'll just quickly take it out of its bag. You should make sure that you are grounded, you know, touch some metal or something, and hopefully you won't short out your equipment. So there we have the motherboard. If I just turn it around the right way, you can see it's a cute little tiny thing. So on the motherboard, there's a few things to note. That's where you give power to the motherboard, so there's always going to be a 24-pin cable from your power supply which will plug into there. Then you can see there's a little 4-pin socket there. That's power to your processor. Again, that will come from your power supply as well. That's where obviously you're going to stick in your CPU. That blue slot is a PCI Express slot. In the case of this, it's a PCI 3.0 slot, so that's where your graphics card would go in. You've also got a PCI Express one-time slot here, which will be useful for things like if you ever wanted to add a sound card or a TV card, and you've got a regular PCI slot there as well, again for another expansion. Those things there are your SATA or SATA ports, however you want to pronounce it, and I think that there, no, these along here actually, are your front I/O kind of port sockets, as it were. So that's where you plug in your hard drive activity LEDs and your power LEDs, which come with the case. So that'll be something we'll be installing after it's all inside. So let's get on with this and install the processor. I've just gotten the CPU out of its packaging, so you can see the gold pads there, or the pins. So this is a socket 1155 motherboard and processor, so that means there's 1155 pins on the CPU itself, and that's what's going to fit together. Now what you do is, see this arm I'm just pointing towards, you have to kind of take that out, lift it up, and just pop that thing out, and there you can see the CPU socket. Now luckily the CPU has got like a gold triangle on the bottom there, on the bottom left there, which tells you, which also then has like a little mark on the actual motherboard, so you make sure those two corners line up and you won't have any trouble. Also, the CPU is actually, it does have a few notches, so holding it from the edge, so you've actually got a notch there and you've got a notch there, so obviously if you make sure those line up, you will not have any trouble installing it. It requires no pressure whatsoever, and it's just a matter of dropping it in like that, so it didn't require any pressure. It fits. Now this is made me feel a bit nervous, but when you place this thing down here, you will be exerting some pressure, but that is absolutely fine. So what we want to do, okay, is just push down, and there you go. There is your CPU installed. Now all we have to do is install the cooler. Now I bought the retail version of this processor. The retail version comes with the stock Intel cooler, and it comes with a better warranty as well. Now this uses like a push pin system, so what you do is you pretty much line up the cooler, and it actually comes with thermal paste already applied as well. So normally you'd have to put a little blob of thermal paste on the processor there and then install your cooler if you're installing a third-party cooler. But if you're installing a stock cooler, the Intel one comes with the thermal paste pre-applied. It's just a matter of dropping it on there, and that will be it. So I'm going to just get this sorted. I'm going to just take the fan cable out actually, because they always neatly kind of wrap it in there, but it means that you have to make sure you get that out. Okay. Alright, now let's see. I think I'll install it this way. And this is like a push pin, so you know, you just have to pretty much push the pins in, and you'll hear until you hear a click. And the click will basically tell you that it's been installed correctly. Okay, there we go. Now if I turn this around on the back, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 plastic pins have pushed through, and they, you know, that click was them being installed. Now when it comes to uninstalling them, you can actually see very closely there's an arrow on each of these corners. You turn that and that lifts up, and that will actually release the cooler if you ever wanted to upgrade the cooler to a better cooling system. Say if you were going to replace the chip with an overclocking chip on a better motherboard, but obviously in this case we're not doing any overclocking, it's not going to run hot, that cooler will be sufficient. Now near the 4-pin power for the processor, which I'll plug in once obviously the board is installed into the case, you've got a 4-pin fan header, and it is labelled, it does say CPU fan. So what we're going to do is take this CPU fan and just plug it in. It only goes in one way, there's like a tab as well. Let me just get that installed. There we go. So that will make sure that the fan is controlled by the motherboard according to the temperature sensor. So the hotter the processor gets, the faster the fan will spin, and that will control that for you. So the CPU is now installed onto the motherboard. Next we're going to get on and install the RAM, but you know, I'll do that once the board is actually in place into the computer. Okay, once you've got the CPU installed onto your motherboard, the next stage is for me to plug the motherboard into my case, or screw it into my case. Now you do not screw it directly into the screw holes on the case, otherwise you will short it out and damage it. So what happens is, with every case you will get these little brass standoffs, as they're called. Now these standoffs screw into the case, and then you screw the motherboard into those. Now depending on the size of the motherboard, you will see there are various screw holes dotted around. Now this one actually came installed This case actually came installed with some standoffs already in place, but they were actually installed there as well as in that corner there, which is not relevant for my board. So what I've actually done is I had a look at my motherboard. I looked at the screws, sockets, the screw holes, where they were, and according to that I moved the standoffs there, and you do get obviously enough standoffs for all different kinds of cases. So once the standoffs are in, you want to then put the motherboard in, but obviously before you do that you must remember to install this thing. This is the I/O shield, so your input-output shield, and I was actually going to forget to put that in, and I was going to start screwing in the motherboard, and then that would have been quite silly, so I had to undo it. So this I/O shield it's just like a little thin piece of whatever material, and that will plug in just there, and that will help you line up the motherboard as well. So what we're going to do, normally you'll find that you see these two round sockets, that's where your mouse and keyboard, like the old style PS2 mouse and keyboard go, and then you've got some USBs there. You can usually look at how it fits your motherboard. So here's my motherboard, bam. Normally, so you can see that all fits like that. Normally those bits are always at the top, so that gives you a guide on how to clip this in. So we're just going to clip in the I/O shield. You'll hear it, you should hear it clip like that. Once you've lined the motherboard up with the standoffs, you simply screw them all in. You don't screw them in too tightly, and that will make sure that the motherboard is nice and secure. But like I said, you don't want to screw them in too tightly because you risk damaging the actual PCB on the motherboard. So get a little magnetic screwdriver and you just screw those all in. In this case, there's a screw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 screws holding this little motherboard in, and you can see it's nice and solidly installed. Okay, once the motherboard's in and secure, I'm going to start plugging in a few bits just in case it becomes tight to fit them later on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my CPU has got power. So I go to my power supply, I pick out the relevant cable, and it only goes in one way, and I'm just going to plug that in. Now I know it's not neat, but you can neaten cable management, etc. by using things such as extensions, but this is not going to be like a high-end super build, and plus this helps you see things like, for example, when it helps you see potential issues, like for example how to route the cables, once all the RAM's installed, etc. So that's that done, and then I'm going to make sure I get the 24 pin. Sometimes it comes in a 20 plus 4 pin scenario, because I'm guessing some really old motherboards use 20 pin adapters. I'm just going to make sure that plugs in. Again, these only go in one way, so it's impossible for you to fit them wrong, and there should be a click, or if not, make sure it's seated correctly. So I've got that done. So the motherboard and now the power supply and the CPU is now connected. You can see I've got a nice chunky couple of cables going, so some cable ties will come in handy, but I'll deal with that later. Next thing I'm going to do is fit the RAM. So you can see the 2 RAM slots, and again the RAM can only go in one way. There are notches on the RAM and the motherboard which will tell you which direction the RAM slots will fit in. So I'm going to quickly get one stick of RAM, here we go. I'll have a look at the board and I will see which way it goes in. And again, you push it down and you'll hear a click. So that's one slot of RAM filled up. Now let's get the other one filled up, and this will give us a total of 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is more than adequate, I think, for a lot of systems, especially a basic HTPC. So we've now got the RAM installed, CPU installed, CPU's got power, the motherboard's got power, and we're going to do obviously some cable tidying when the time is right. So now what's left to do is to remove this section here, and into that I'm going to be installing my Blu-ray drive and hard drives. Now remember, that is not going to be the case with most of the other enclosures out there. Most other custom PC cases are much simpler to build into. This one has got a bit of a quirky design, but that's to do with the nature of the case, you know, it being a HTPC case. So just to recap, I'm just going to remove that section there, install my Blu-ray drive and hard drive, and then that's going to go back in, and then we're going to see about wiring those bits up to the SATA ports on the motherboard. Okay guys, now I've taken out the drive cage for this case, and I've installed my 3.5-inch drive, and you can see my Blu-ray drive. So that's all been just slotted in, very simple, and screwed in to secure it. So you've got 4 screws there for the Blu-ray drive, and there's 6 screws actually on the hard drive, 3 on each side. So it's nicely secure. And whilst the cage was out, I took the liberty to plug in the front panel connectors on the case. Now any case that you buy will come with a set of front panel connectors to connect the front USB sockets, the power connection, the power light, the hard drive activity light. It's pretty simple. The little plugs are labelled on the actual plugs that come with the case, and on the motherboard there'll be a little diagram somewhere. You just need to look for it, which will say something. If I just show you, I don't know if I can find it, it'll be difficult to zoom. There we go. You can just about make that out. That says on the top box FP1, then it says power LED, HDD LED, power switch, reset switch, and that actually is helping you plug in the front panel connectors in there. So it's all self-explanatory really. If you obviously do get stuck, you do have a manual to refer to, but I just thought I'd take the liberty to plug that in because it can get a bit fiddly because they're quite small plugs, whilst the hard drive cage was out. Normally again in a regular mid-tower case that would not be an issue, and you would just simply carry on, fit all your components, and then you usually, I usually end up hooking that stuff up last. So without further ado, I'm just going to now drop the optical and hard drive caddy into this case, and I'll repeat just one more time. This is quite a unique feature. This is a unique feature to this case. You don't normally get a removable section which holds the hard drive and the optical drive. So you can see there's my Blu-ray drive, and in that corner is my hard drive. So I'm going to screw that back in, and then I'm going to get power cables from the power supply and SATA cables into the motherboard, and then we're pretty much done, so bear with me. Okay guys, so the drive cage was put back in, and then it was just a simple matter of hooking up the optical and hard drive to the power supply and motherboard. From the power supply you would use what are called just the regular power connectors. They're not Molex, I don't know what they're called, but use those. And for the actual connection to the motherboard you use a SATA connection, which is one of those. So just to show you quickly, that's the type of power connection that you would use from the power supply to connect your optical drives and your hard drives and SSD drives. And then the other one next to it, that is a SATA connection, and that goes from the motherboard to your hard drives or optical drives or SSD drives. So it's a simple matter of plugging those in. Now as you can see, the cables are a mess. However, the motherboard itself has got clear airflow, so it should be okay. And the fans have all been plugged in. I've only plugged in one of the fans onto the motherboard, which is the exhaust fan. The intakes I've actually plugged in using Molex adapters straight into the power supply, so they'll be running at full speed. So I've got 2 intake fans and 1 exhaust fan, So that's pretty much it. Alright guys, so after a bit of tidying up, using a bit of cable tidying and a few adjustments, what you'll find is whenever you fit something, you'll always afterwards realise there's probably a way you could have done it a bit better. There's a couple of things that I ended up changing. I ended up moving the hard drive position because I don't have a graphics card installed at the moment, and that allowed me to use one less modular cable from the power supply. So now the same modular cable from the power supply is powering the Blu-ray and the hard drive. And to be honest with you, if I did get a graphics card, it would fit in the gap anyway. These wires are easily moved out of the way. As you see, I've used a few cable ties just to get it clean as possible. The motherboard has got good airflow over it. I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier, but I swapped that fan's orientation because for some reason it came installed as an intake, and the two fans that are underneath there were also pre-installed as intake. So I would have had 3 fans intaking, none exhausting, which obviously isn't good. So that's been moved to being an outtake fan, sorry, an exhaust fan. So we've got the kind of air pressure that Silverstone were recommending, with more fans blowing in and less blowing out, so that should keep it dust free for longer. So you can see it's pretty neat considering the size of the case. There's room for a decent size graphics card in there. So I'm going to now just power it on. I'm not going to go through the whole install process just yet, but just to give you guys an idea of the sound, the noise. It's pretty quiet. You can see it has booted up. It's just obviously got no OS on it, so that's fine. Just gotta sort that out. But as you can see, I'm very happy with it. Pretty neat install. So just to recap, we've got a B75 chipset MSI motherboard, the B75 MAE33 with the i3-3220 Ivy Bridge dual core at 3.3 GHz, 8 gigs of Corsair RAM in there. I'm using a 250 gig hard drive. Got a PCI Express 3 slot there when I upgrade my graphics, PCI 1X as well. So, you know, room for expansion, and a regular PCI there as well. It's a pretty neat build, I would say, overall, considering the size of it. It's going to be covered anyway. So very happy with that. I might do a video of it up and running, but you know, you guys have pretty much seen it. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comment section. If you like the video, please press the like button, and I appreciate all your comments, likes, and obviously if you want to, please subscribe to my channel. It will help a great deal. So thanks for watching my mini HTPC build vlog, obviously with bits cut out, but it was the best way of doing it. So thanks for watching, and see you later.